Hey everybody, okay, so this is for tourism, performance and culture. And this week we are talking about authenticity. We're reading Bruner, pages 33 through 123, and then Staged Authenticity by McCannell. Um, so I'm going to start with the Staged Authenticity by Dean McCannell. Basically, the theme that I got of this is staged authenticity. So like the ways that authenticity is socially constructed and staged or performed for tourists. Um, and so, like for that, we're talking about the arrangement of the social space, so the setting in which it's taking place, and also like a central finding that McCannell talks about is that sightseeing is a form of ritual respect for society, and that tourism absorbs some of the social functions of religion in the modern world. So, like, it's authenticity is encompassing a bunch of different things. So it's you're trying to fulfill this I guess this imagination or idea of authenticity for the tourist. So you, in order to provide an income, which we'll get to that soon. So then when we talk about like structure and belief, so like those who performed it, and outsiders who neither perform nor observe the performance. So we talk about like the front and the back regions is what Goffman was talking about. So like with the back regions, it's like those are the parts or like the secret parts that the tourists don't get to see in most points. Just and then the front is basically the meeting place where all the tourists and hosts like come together. So like the front is where the performance is basically taking place, whereas behind the scenes, the back, it's like the preparation of that. And then we get into this idea of mystification, which brings me back to the back regions, which is like there's more than meets the eye, which are like the secrets, of I guess the culture that's being toured. Yeah, so it's like what is the what is the real reality? And it makes me think of like reality TV shows, like the real world. Like how is that authentic? Oh, they're just people who are all, I guess, put in this melting pot essentially. Um, and they're just given booze and money, and this is supposed to be an authentic thing, which most of them don't have access to booze all the time, so I don't see how that's authentically them at all. Anyways, so but I digress. So then we talk about like authenticity in like the tourist settings, and like how the tourists really want this I guess a well-rounded trip. So they want to have fun, they want to have entertainment, they want to have knowledge about everything that they're doing or touring. And then we get into like how tourists started had it was a pilgrimage, yeah, pilgrimage. And so it's like it's a similar behind touring. It's just like everyone's searching for this authentic experience, and then we just took it and like capitalized off of it. And so those are basically the things that I got from there. Daniel Borston, I'm hoping I say this right. The pseudo event is like basically where the reader understands something about the tourist setting itself, and that it's not exactly intellectually satisfying. So if it doesn't like, it's like, the way I understand it is if it doesn't like wow you, then it's like, it's a pseudo event. It doesn't seem, I guess, authentic because it doesn't intellectually stimulate you. So then now I'm going to go on to the chapters 1 through 3 in the Bruner text. And so chapter 1 talks about the Messiah lawn. So the Messiah is basically like there are these a group of men who are in Kenya, and there's a tourist attraction called the Mayor's Ranch, and it's like near Nairobi, and yes, it's near Nairobi, and basically it's talking the whole tourist realism thing takes them back. So it's like this whole day of things. And I'm like, oh wow, that's a pretty penny. So like this whole day of stuff. So like they go out into the wilderness, they get this authentic experience, like the real, like I want to say back region that Goffman was talking about, experience into their world that is authentic to them and everything that they do. So we talk about pastoralism, like how this, and they talk about the story as to like how they were colonialized, and then it gets a little weird. I like to know, I think, because we talk about how the Messiah basically like these really like, I guess, grimy people who fight all the time, but that's not at all what they're I guess explaining to the tourists that are coming here. So it's like they give this like interesting paradox where McCannell says the pastoralism scene is pristine and independent, but depends on the production of idealization on Messiah adaptability and interdependence. So it's like we're talking about these people who are this independent, strong people, but yet they are dependent upon, the tourists coming in to see them. So it's kind of like, are you really getting an authentic, step into this world when you're acting as a tourist because they're performing this for them? Then we go on to just moving on to that. So like chapter 2, talking about authenticity, nationalism, and globalization in African tourism. We meet this guy called Arjun Arpaduai, I hope that's how you say it, where he observes ethnography, where the connection between topics and place becomes the defining characteristic of a people to the exclusion of other perspectives. And then we have this method that McCannell talks about is like this controlled method. So this controlled comparison to consider how one ethnic group of the Maasai are exhibited for tourists. And so this is where we get into like these 3 different truths. So that's why I think of like pluralism in a sense. And it's basically showing like this is the truth for each site. So they talk about 3 different sites, and of course one of them being what we already talked about, the Myers Ranch, which is basically designed for foreign tourists, and it's like supposed to be this tourist realism, and it denies change as to the reading, because it's just like it's supposed to be the African primitive. And then you have the Bomas of Kenya, and this is where it gets the reading got a little bit more dense here, but this is like a nationalist theater where it highlights change for the nation and stuff, and it aims to preserve the heritage. So it's like very ritualistic, traditional performance for the tourist. And but it's interesting, it's like the audience is primarily modern urban Kenyans, so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then we have the Sundowners of Africa, and this is basically the luxury. This is what I call glamping outside of camping, because you want to be out there in the wilderness, but you don't want to be out there in the wilderness. So it's basically what the Sundowners are to me. They're more of like the pulp culture image of Africa. So at this type of site, there's drinking, there's cocktails, there's storytelling. It's like this real like interactive thing, whereas like where the tourists can actually participate. And so that brings us into another thing we talked about, I believe, last week or the beginning of the semester, which was seems like last week, was the questioning gaze, which is like where we doubt, where tourists can doubt the credibility or the authenticity, as well as the facts that are being presented to them in this tourist production. Because again, tourist production, it's something that was produced, it's something that was made to be consumed by us or tourists. Well, I'm a tourist sometimes. Anyway, so it's like this constructedness. So there's 2 parts to it that's mentioned. So first, there's an unpredictability about the meaning of any performance, for individuals attribute their own understandings to each event. So the questioning gaze, it's like, that's the first part. Depending on like how we feel about it, or like how the tourist feels about the performance, if they buy into it, that's gonna, of course, either enable the questioning gaze or like make it go away. And then the second point is like there's some tourists apply a frame of activity of sightseeing to everything that occurs within the tour. So like everything that occurs in the tour, it is going to be a part of like how they think about this. So if it doesn't flow to them in their mind, then it doesn't make sense, and so therefore they don't buy into it. Therefore, the questioning gaze, that's what that was. Which I thought was extremely interesting, and it's honestly kind of like I would have a questioning gaze too, especially after reading all of these different sites and how they both portray the Maasai. Like they're all kind of, I guess, being conformed into this type of tourist, like they said, production that's digestible for the tourists, so they don't feel like there's a problem. Because in the first one, the Myers Ranch, it was closed down because they felt like it was hurtful to them, to other tourists, as to the honesty that they were giving in the tours. So it's kind of like, well, we had to edit it in order to make it digestible for tourism, so we can have money to live our lives, which each one of those sites have they all thrive off of income from the tourists. So I mean, it makes total sense. You have to conform to your audience. But then that also, of course, the whole question is, what is authentic? How are we searching for this authentic feeling when it's been tailored to what we want anyway? So it's not even going to be authentic. But I digress. Um, but yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. So like, just to talk about that and like how everything is different for even for the different people, it's extremely interesting, which brings me into which leads me into chapter 3, which is slavery and the return of the black diaspora, the tourism of Ghana. So like, I thought this was interesting because it basically talks about how even if me being of African American descent of Africa, given my background, given my lineage and my skin color, of course, um, I'm of Africa. Like, people are gonna think, oh, she's, Africa. Even though I'm definitely from Texas, but that's also how Daniel McCannell was talking about in this chapter, talking about the tourism in Ghana, how the Ghanaians don't really see African Americans as of Africa. They see us as Americans. They see us as tourists, and how our truths kind of like collide in a sense, and things aren't, I guess, as easy as we would like them to be, or as easily digestible or understandable. So yeah, that's basically what I got from that. I like the readings. I think they were very good, extremely dense. I had to read a couple of things twice. Um, but from what I'm getting here, tourism is extremely complex, and it has a lot of different factors coming into like what is authentic, what is not authentic, and then like what is authentic to individuals and what is authentic to the culture are extremely two different things. So I think when Goffman was talking about the front and back region, that definitely made a lot of sense to me, because what you see in the front is what you see in the front, but when we go home, it's different. So yeah, I think it was good. So I look forward to next week's readings. Bye.